Welcome back, everybody, to Profits Unlimited podcast channel, recorded live here in Louisville, Kentucky in our Turfs Up Radio studio. And we've got a really interesting topic for today. You know, in the past, we've talked a little bit about who makes the call when it comes to snow and ice management on whether you're going to go out plowing or you're going out salting or whatever the service may be, putting down a liquid application. And, you know, how important it is that you have the flexibility to make that call with the customer, and that customer trusts that you're going to make the decision, and you don't have to call them and get prior authorization before you go out to, make an application or go plow their lot, because at 2:00 in the morning, sometimes it's difficult to get a hold of people. So that's certainly something, if you haven't heard that podcast, certainly go listen to it. It's called Who Makes the Call? And this is a follow-up to that podcast where it's basically, it says to go or not to go. So what I mean by that is you've been given the authority to make the call with the customer. They trust you. So now it's game day, as we call it, around Wayne's Lawn Service, and it's actually snowing outside, or we got some freezing rain, or we just got inclement weather conditions going on, and we're thinking, okay, should I go or should I wait? And how do you decide when it's time to go or if you should wait? There's a lot of things that come into play. There's a lot of variables with each event as they come along, and I understand that. But what I've seen starting to happen a lot, and this happened a little bit years ago, but certainly with the influx of social media, one of the biggest problems I see happening now, guys are getting on social media and they're asking their competitor, are you going out? When are you going out? And that's not necessarily a bad thing to ask, somebody and somebody that you trust. Hey, man, what time are you all going out? What time are you going to start your applications? But the problem with that is, it's kind of like passing that baton off to somebody in a race, right? When you got a relay race, I'm running up to somebody and I got the baton stuck out and I'm saying, here, man, you take it and go. Or are you passing that baton or that decision off to a competitor and letting your competitor make the decision for you? And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but here's why you want to consider not doing it that way. Or why, when somebody posts something up on a social media that says, hey, when should I go out? Why you got to consider what your response is going to be to that person. Flip that around, whether you're the one asking the question of should I go or should I not go or when, or if you're the person that's going to be answering that question for somebody. And just a couple things to talk about for that so we can help make the right decision on when to go and when not to go. And first thing we got to consider before we ask somebody else is, do they know the verbiage that's in your particular contract? Because let's say I'm sitting here at Wayne's Lawn Service here in Louisville, okay, and it doesn't matter what market you're in, but my contract verbiage is written to where I've got zero tolerance accounts. And the verbiage in my contract says, that we're responsible for coming out and making an application or servicing the property when weather conditions warrant an application. Well, then what that means to me is I'm going to go out a lot sooner than somebody would with a 2-inch trigger. So if I post something on social media that says, hey, what time should I go out, guys? When are you all going out? Well, the guy that answers that says, well, I'm probably going to wait 4 or 5 hours before I go out, you don't want to necessarily use that to make your decision. And I think that's where trying to give advice for somebody when to go out or when not to go out, and then some of the conflicting messages, and you guys have seen it yourself, I'm sure, on social media, guys says, well, they're salt pirates, or they're this, or they're that, and they're just going out to go out. Maybe not. Maybe you, as a contractor, you're not going out just to go out. You're going out because your contract says you need to go out. And I think that's something that we need to learn as a business is let's make that choice on our own. Don't count on your competitor to tell you, yeah, it's time to go, or yeah, we're going. And don't, what it really boils down to, honestly, in my opinion, is confidence on your end as the contractor that you're going to make the right choice. And, we're going to make some choices sometimes that, maybe it's 34 degrees and snowing, but we don't have, and it was 40 degrees yesterday, and the temperature's going down to 19 degrees tonight where you're at, and you're thinking, okay, the ground temperature's pretty warm out there. So is this going to be just a grass snow, or is it going to be one of the snows that we're worried about elevated surfaces? And again, going back to the verbiage on how your contract's written, yeah, maybe 99% of that snow is going to be on grass or on cars or shrubs or something other than the pavement, because the pavement temperatures are warm right now, right? But we got to think of, okay, if we're going down to a temperature that's cold enough to where we're going to have some isolated slick spots, whether it's sidewalks, steps, parking lots, whatever it may be, what's the verbiage in your contract say as to who's responsible for taking care of that? If you got a 2-inch trigger and you get a ½ inch of snow and it's finished and it's wet and most of it dries, then maybe based on how your contract's written, you're not responsible for that. But if you've got zero tolerance accounts, it doesn't matter if 100% of the lot or sidewalk's bad or if 10% of the sidewalk's bad. It's up to you to go out and make that application that's required based on the weather conditions, based on the verbiage in your contracts, so you don't have a slip and fall. Because the last thing we want to think about is your customer calling you and saying, hey, your contract, Dwayne, said that you guys were going to be out here when weather conditions warrant an application. And my answer cannot be, well, the ground temperature was warm and it wasn't sticking predominantly. Well, guess what? It did stick and it did freeze here on these steps or over here in this parking area where somebody was getting out of the car. And guess what happened? We had a slip and fall. So to go or not to go is strictly based on your verbiage and your contracts. Don't let your competitor necessarily make that decision for you, because what we don't know and what they don't know is how each other's contracts are written. And the last thing we want to do is to have a slip and fall where no service was provided. I know with Wayne's Lawn Service, our saying around here, we got two of them basically. One is you can't put a price on safety. And I honestly believe that, because, if you look statistically at the average cost of slip and falls here in 2019, the average cost of a slip and fall on ice generally runs about $35,000. And the settlement after that slip and fall, according to the Associated Snow Contractors of America, the information they put out here in 2019 was $20,000. So you look at a $35,000 expense, a $20,000 settlement, all of a sudden we're looking at an average of a $55,000 cost that could have possibly been prevented if we'd have just went out and made the application, even though the whole property wasn't bad. But the whole property or all the sidewalks don't have to be bad to have that slip and fall. So err on the side of safety. At Wayne's Lawn Service, I would always rather have to, when I answer that phone, when that phone rings, I would always want to be able to have to explain why we were there versus why we weren't there. Because when they're calling and asking why we were not there and why we didn't show up, my experience tells me there's probably been a problem. So I would rather that customer call and say, hey, Wayne, we didn't have a whole lot of snow last night. Just curious why you guys came out and made an application. Well, because, hey, we know the ground temperatures were warm, but we also know it was getting cold enough to where we'd have some isolated slick spots, and we didn't want to have anybody slip and fall. And I think that is an honest answer. And based on your customer base, if you've got the right customers, they're going to understand that. Now, zero tolerance accounts are not for everybody. I get that too. Okay? So again, what's that go back to? It goes back to the verbiage within your contract. So next time you see it posted up on Facebook or wherever, whatever social media you like to count on, should I go out and when should I go out? Maybe the first question you ask is, what's the verbiage in your contract. That's how you can decide if you should go or not go, or when you should go or not go. Because remember, they've hired us as the professional. They've given us the flexibility to make the call when to go and when not to go. Don't count on somebody else to make that decision for you because you lack the confidence and you're worried about, well, it's questionable. What's going to be questionable and where it's going to be problematic is when you have a slip and fall when you didn't show up. Remember, you can't put a price on safety, and profit is not a dirty word.